Hello, my friends, and welcome to the NFRW Empower Hour. I am Glennis Chester, your host for the series that provides in-depth discussions on issues that are forefront in today's culture and gives you the tools to speak with authority on important topics in today's political landscape. First and foremost, happy Valentine's Day. I know hearts, 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 hearts everywhere. I hope that you've been able to spend part of your day with someone you love, and I love the fact that you're spending part of your day with me and our Empower Hour team. We have got a great program for you tonight. I'm really excited about it. If you live in a blue state, you get extra hearts from us because you have challenges that many just cannot imagine. But are you doomed to live in a dystopian nightmare where you are powerless as your freedoms and liberties are systematically stripped away? No. The short answer is absolutely not. But it takes courage, heart, and genuine conviction to not just survive, but to thrive. Even in red states like Texas, where I live now, we have those disturbing blue urban areas that we must learn to navigate. Dallas, Houston, Austin, San Antonio, and El Paso, for example. And we all need to learn the strategies necessary to being successful Republicans in an area dominated by Democrats and how to tip the scales in our favor. Our guest speaker this evening will discuss the secrets to his success in my home state of California. But first, a little housekeeping. 1, please keep yourselves muted. 2, if you have any questions, please type them into the chat feature. We will answer as many as possible at the end of the program. Oh, and by the way, thank you to some of you who have recommended taking questions ahead of the program. From now on, both in this Empower Hour series and in our bite-sized tools, you can send me questions up to 24 hours in advance of the program, and I will be able to answer those and work them into the topic. So don't forget to get my email and send me your questions. 3, don't forget to let your clubs know that past episodes of this program are always archived on the NFRW website in the resource library. And finally, a huge thank you to Erica Watley and Kim Bowers who are providing tech support on tonight's program. You ladies are the best. And speaking of the best, I know that I am biased, but I have the best committee in NFRW. Those who tune in regularly already know Kim Bowers and Christy Antonick. And if you also watch Bite-Sized Tools, you know Sharon Boring. Tonight, I get to introduce you to the final member of our program committee, Olivia McCaffrey. Olivia and I served together on the Caring for America and Americanism committees before working on programs this term. She too is a former resident of California, recommended this evening's speaker, so it seems only right that she should introduce him. Olivia, I turn it over to you.
Thank you. Our guest speaker is an acclaimed author, speaker, and former chairman of the California Republican Party. He is the publisher of PoliticalVanguard.com and author of the Amazon bestseller, The Divided Era, which explains why the more government decides, the more it divides. He has appeared on Fox News and Fox Business, to name 2, and is a regular political commentator on KUSI in San Diego, California. His topics range from foreign policy to economic reform. His opinion pieces have appeared in Forbes, The Weekly Standard, and Politico, to name a few. Well known to California Republican women, he is a sought-after speaker and has spoken to almost all, if not all, Republican women's clubs throughout the state. He has raised over $20,000 for California Republican women's groups. A little-known fact about him is that he is an accomplished chef, and one of the ways he has raised that money is by auctioning off dinners for 8, from appetizers to desserts, which he prepares in your home and presents elegantly. It's my pleasure to introduce my friend, Tom Del Beccaro.
Well, thank you everyone for tuning in, and Olivia, always great to see you, and thank you to everyone for all the work that you do. I have a dry cough, so I'm going to try and hold out my voice as best I can. And glad to be with you. I do write for Fox. I also write for Newsmax. You can catch me there. I hope you thought about canceling DirecTV and letting them know about that. But it's an interesting topic tonight because it says how to live in a blue state. So that's a wide variety of things. I suggest you find that good restaurant, that good bottle of wine that will help you get through some of these periods of time. But if you want to talk about politics, I'm happy to do that as well. I was chairman of the California Republican Party, and we used to do a heck of a lot of stuff in this state. It isn't done so much anymore, and that is too bad. And what I'd like to describe for you is what I think the best strategy politically it is for the minority party in a particular state, in a particular county, or it could even be just a particular city. Overall, we must come to a new understanding of Republicans of where politics is today, nationwide and in these blue states. We are, of course, ever more divided, right? You among your friends know who you can talk to, who you can not talk to. And you have ever deeper red and blue states, red and blue counties. And as the hostess pointed out, you have cities, the major cities are all turned Democrat, and the countryside is all Republican. That historically is actually quite normal. And ancient Athens and their democracy, it was the city that was liberal and the countryside that was conservative. And the way the liberals ran it into the ground was they had the assembly every day, and the conservative farmers couldn't make it into Athens, and they held sway. We also need to understand the different rules today. We've known for years the media is unhelpful, right? So the question is, how do we compete in this environment and succeed in some of these blue areas? And there's two broad areas that I'd like to talk about, one a lot more than another, and then happy to answer questions. And the two broad areas are what I call ideas and ground game. If we start with the easy and less fun stuff, easy because it's easy to grasp and I think get done because we've been doing it for so long, there's no what I call substitute for elbow grease when it comes to election. And we need to understand something very clear here. Politics is a business for Democrats. It's not a business for us. We believe government should be limited. We believe politicians should go home and live under the rules they create. And we also believe that they should leave us alone. But in today's world, the Democrats in Washington and in so many capitals don't believe that at all. They think government should be at the center of people's lives. And sure enough, government today is this, if you throw in regulations and the cost, is over half the US economy. So I need to say that again. Over half of the spending is either directly by a government or the cost of regulation. And that is onerous, and that's why the economy is teetering between presidents because of so much spending. But importantly, somebody's cashing those checks. And we need to understand as Republicans that they cash those checks for a business. And so simply appealing to people saying freedom versus not, or government should be small, we must understand that if you went to the head of AT&T and say government should be small, he'd say, fine, but I have government contracts, so cut somewhere else. And that applies all the way down. In Los Angeles, California, just as an example, the person most in charge of the homeless program there has a salary now this year that exceeds that of the President of the United States. I want to say that again. The homeless director gets paid more than the president. That's a business. If he was ultimately successful, he'd be out of a job. That's why Reagan said governments institutionalize problems. They never solve them. So we must understand that we're up against people who make a living off this. When they lose, they're out of a job. Sometimes when they win, they're in the job. When we lose, we go home, we take care of our families, we go to work, those kind of things. Asymmetrical, right? They're more into it than we are. So there's no substitute for voter contacts. There's no substitute for chasing down ballots. And there's no substitute for us being there when the votes are counted. That is what parties have done since the beginning of time. And it was Republican Lincoln who gave us our current format. Lincoln, when he was ahead of the Whig Party in Illinois, said, I want one person in charge of 10 Whigs every year in every election cycle. 3 or 4 times in the off year, you have to talk to those Whigs and make sure they're happy. Then you should talk to them more the second year, and you got to get them to the polls, which was a big deal back then because some people lived out in the woods and you had to go send out a cart and you had to bring them all the way in. Well, we do the same things today, just with technology. But one trap Republicans have fallen into in the last decade is where they've been unsuccessful, and especially in blue states, is no longer doing the in-person voter contact. We're relying too much on phones. We're relying too much on mail. We're relying too much on texting, whereas Democrats, because they have so many points of contact with government, are always there in person. We need to learn to do a better job of knocking on doors, holding coffees, holding events to bring people in the door. And there's no substitute for that voter contact. My family's been involved in politics since the 50s, knocking on doors all those many years. I still contact people directly, even if I write for Fox on what should be done in the next cycle. We still have to talk to people. But that's the getting out the vote angle. What I really wanted to concentrate on, I think would be more helpful, is this idea of ideas for elections. And in that regard, I've noticed that Republicans are falling into a trap. You know, think to yourselves how many times you have maybe heard a Republican say something to the effect, well, we vote for these people, and then they disappoint us over the next 2 years. Anyone ever heard something like that? Right? Well, we need to realize that voting alone is not enough. There's a reason why Franklin said, a republic, madam, if you can keep it. Because historically, democracies are hectic interludes. It's normal for things to have centralized power and for the average person's voice to be unheard. And with the asymmetry I talked to you about before, where the Democrats see it as a business, we can't simply say, well, I voted for that guy, I don't know what he did the next 2 years. And keep in mind, voting alone isn't always successful. The founders didn't vote out the English. They didn't vote out King George. What they did was fight for their freedom. So it's also not enough just to simply field candidates, right? Often in blue states and in cities and otherwise, we struggle to get candidates to run. It's necessary that we get them on the ballot. It's necessary to get good community leaders and bring them up. But even that isn't enough. But before I leave that topic, I want to say how essential it is in blue states to have down ticket candidates. Because often, like, take my state of California, and as Henny Youngman would say, please take it. The reality is that whoever's running for governor has in the Republican slot, has a slim chance of becoming the governor, right? Because they have a 22-point voter registration advantage. We have Dianne Feinstein just announced that she's not running again, and she's thought by the Democrats to be too conservative in this state. even though she has one of the most liberal voting records in the country. She saw, and so 3 Democrats are about, 2 have announced, the third is about to announce, and they're very far left and farther left, and then most far left. There's none in the middle. So the Senate candidate probably won't have a great chance either. But what's really necessary is these down ticket candidates, because those down ticket candidates, and what do I mean by that? Water board, school board. You all know how important the school board elections have become and how they're changing the face of America. The reason why getting candidates to each of these offices is so critical is that when I run for the local school board, I bring my constituents out to vote that day. If I'm bringing my friends and constituents and network out to vote that day, they're more likely to vote up ticket, right? Because they have their own reason to get there. If we rely solely on the top of the ticket to drive voter output in a blue state, that is very harmful and doesn't work. And that causes us to lose down ticket races. So recruitment for those down tickets is really important. Now, what does that mean overall? Is that enough? The answer is no. And in blue states, very in particular, the power of ideas and running on ideas is absolutely essential. You can't go out and say, well, in California, I can't go out and say, well, the Democrats are all wrong. They've done bad things. So vote for us. Okay, there's probably a lot of people who feel that things have gone bad. If you're living in Los Angeles, I don't know if you saw that rapper, I won't know her name, but last week or 2 weeks ago, she came out and said she doesn't feel safe in LA, so she moved to Florida. There are many people who agree with her. But what did we learn in the last election? The Democrats will vote for any Democrat. I mean, any Democrat on the ballot. And I only need 2 words to prove that to you. John Fetterman. Obviously the worst candidate in American history. If there was someone worse, I don't know who it is. They voted for him no matter what. We, on the other hand, tended to fight each other all the way in that race and others all the way there. So it's not enough just to say they're bad or they're doing things wrong, because the Democrats, they are doing things wrong, but their voters don't seem to care. Take California, Gavin Newsom. It's a train wreck out here. Today's headline is about how the electrical grid is going to crash. Some minor thing like that. They want to take away gas stoves, as if I would cook for someone else on an electric stove. Not going to happen. Homelessness, worse in the country. Crime, worst in the country. Poverty level of children, worst in the country. Can't deliver water. What is going well? Well, the ingenuity of people in California is what keeps it afloat, and they want solutions. So here is the very, and sorry again, the very crux of what I wanted to talk to you about, and what simply must be done if you're going to succeed in a city, in a county, or in a blue state. And the answer to that is to marry discrete solutions to very discrete problems. You have to run on solutions with attractive ideas. A week ago, I was at a roundtable for the Committee to Unleash Prosperity. We were having a general discussion, and Governor Walker from Wisconsin was there, and I nodded to him during the discussion and said the way back in Wisconsin was through initiatives and ideas, not just candidates. So what do I mean by that? Well, government fails all the time. Government in California is failing all the time. The federal government is failing all the time. There are hundreds of issues on which the Democrats fall down because government is not a good solution to so many issues. So the opportunities are there. What do we do to capitalize on those opportunities and reach Democrats and win elections? The answer is often initiatives or some sort of petition drive or a candidate who drives a particular petition. In American history, probably the greatest single example of that comes from, believe it or not, California. In the 1970s, the last time we had a lot of inflation in this country, California had a system which would tax people if their home property tax would rise with the perceived value of the house. So whether you sold the house or not, you got these paper gains. You bought the house for $200,000. It's now worth $400,000 in the mind of the assessor because property values in his mind have gone up, and therefore you're paying taxes on $400,000. Well, in California, there were so many on fixed income who couldn't afford those increases. They were being driven out of their houses and leaving the state. So what happened? And this is really important. Solution didn't come from government, didn't even come from the Republican Party. A group of volunteers ran an initiative which became known as Prop 13. And that, of course, capped property tax increases. And they went out in the age of the phone. You all may have cell phones, but back then we just had the phone. It was on the wall. And when I was a kid, I had to ask permission to use it. I was 1 of 8. And this is actually would have been my parents' anniversary today. We had to ask permission to use the phone, but it was old fashioned. And they printed out these petitions and they went door to door and they got signatures. Prop 13 makes the ballot, becomes successful. Republicans sweep in with it, take over the California Assembly. Reagan takes that tax cutting mode, goes to the White House, and the Berlin Wall falls. Pretty much in that order. But what was important about that? The important thing wasn't waiting for a top-down solution to win in a blue environment. It was a solution on the ground, a very defined problem, rising property taxes, a very defined solution, a cap, a grassroots efforts to gather signatures, knocking on doors and doing things in person because, let's face it, we didn't have email when this occurred. And we didn't have cell phones. In that same era, not far from where I live now, in 1978, the area I was living in had an assembly district that had turned pretty blue. It was mostly Democrat. But a candidate ran for office, and he was known as the angry taxpayer. He was the head of the Taxpayer Association, wasn't a friend to a lot of Democrats, and hated big government. He eventually became a US congressman. But how did he survive? How did he win his election? Well, what he did was capitalize on the moment in time and the ideas that were floating around. So this was the same year as Prop 13. It was also the year in California where we had a Supreme Court justice, some of you might recognize the name, Rose Bird. And she was the Chief Justice and had made 82 straight decisions not upholding the death penalty. So clearly she wasn't following the law and people were angry. So how did he capitalize on it? Well, he spent his time going door to door, again, in person, going door to door, for Democrats, not Republicans, and some independents. And he spoke to Democrats and he asked a simple question: what's on your mind? What, if anything, is bothering you? And there were a lot of Democrats who said nothing. 60-some% of Democrats nationwide like the direction of the country today. You're not going to reach that. But almost 40% of the Democrats he talked to were upset about property tax increases and Rose Bird. So what did he do? He ran on Rose Bird and he ran on Prop 13 in a blue area. Of course, the Republicans were all in on that. Even a majority of independents were on that, and a huge percentage of Democrats. And he said, if you elect me, I will support these things. So what happened? He won his election, built on that, and turned it into a red district for years to come. What's important in that story are the two things. One, ideas. He didn't go around saying, I'm the angry taxpayer, like me. He didn't go around saying, I'm the angry taxpayer, the Democrats are bad. He went around these neighborhoods talking about those ideas, carrying voter red forms, and then what? Promising to work on the issues with a discrete problem. I'm going to help recall Rose Bird. I'm going to help put Prop 13 in. My opponent won't. He won, and then for years later, that district was red, even though voter registration was blue. His the person who followed him was a woman named Lynn Leach. And she was probably the most conservative candidate that I ever met and worked for. But even though voter registration was still blue in that district, after electing a Republican for a number of years, she ran and she would get 62, she got 62, 3, and 5% of the vote in 3 elections. Now, how did she do that? Well, it wasn't because she ran around saying, I'm the most conservative. She was, and she voted conservative. But the biggest issue of the day then is one of the biggest issues of today now, which is the state of the education system. California had a wacky way of funneling money, and it went to the powerful unions, not areas like where I live. And the issue was called equalization. So all students should have fairly equal amounts, local control. And I remember talking to Democrats in those days saying, who supported her, who were otherwise, out there. And they said to her, Lynn visits us every month, comes to our meetings, updates us on the education fight. Boom. What was she doing? Working on an idea, putting forth a solution, and doing it in person. And it worked. For years, she worked. And she got some of the highest voting totals of any assembly person, man or woman, in the whole state, even though she came from a blue state. Republicans in California used to do well when they ran on initiatives. Prop 13, 3 strikes. That was an initiative that said if you got convicted of 3 felonies, you had an extended sentence. You couldn't, there was sentence multipliers in effect. You couldn't just get out the 3rd time if you committed a 3rd crime. So, and when they ran on those things and their candidates backed them, it worked. Now, here in California, the Democrats want us down to 50 gallons of water a day. Now, if you have as much hair as me, that simply wouldn't work because you can't get away with that. It does work for Democrats who live in high rises in the city because they don't have lawn, they don't have kids, so they don't want their kids out in the, playing on and on. You can just figure it out. But what Republicans don't do in the state today, much to their detriment, is that they simply don't go around face to face and say, here's our solution. So I see that as 5:31 now. I'd like to answer some questions. But just to sum up, I want to say it's a new era of politics, even though it was a predictable era to get here. The new era is the Democrats listen to their own media and they vote for their own people no matter what. But things are failing. There are potholes everywhere. And people want solutions. The smart group comes up with an idea in their area, proposes a solution, finds candidates to back that solution, and then uses that volunteer effort to drive voters to a solution, not just saying the other side is bad. Pennsylvania used to be all blue. It had Republican supermajorities. Wisconsin flipped. Michigan flipped at one point. This isn't rocket science, but it is important to speak with one voice. And people, especially in our party, are attracted to ideas, and we undervalue them. And so thank you very much for listening to my thoughts today.
That was fabulous, Tom. Thank you so very much. Olivia, you were right. I could listen to him all day long. So Erica, do we have any questions in the chat right off the bat?
I have one so far. What is it that holds the loyalty of the Democratic constituents?
Why are Democrats so loyal? Okay, so actually this in part, my next book is called, which I'm working on feverishly for decades actually, is called The Lessons of the American Civilization. Should be out next year. I write what's called historical philosophy on how civilizations come together, rise, and what they're like as they decline. This is my work about the American civilization. When the Mayflower came over, there wasn't any government committee to welcome them. There was no Medicare. There was a lot of fortitude and struggle. And we have now created a system that really broke with FDR, where people want government whenever something goes wrong. And that was greatly amplified in the 1970s with television. If you look at a chart of government spending, it's kind of flat. And then in the 1970s, it goes straight up. Government now to them is a social justice monitor. I have two good friends across the street who are very liberal. I am in California, in Northern California. And what I find is that if I talk to them about particular issues, and tell them, some of the facts, they're very open to the solution. But Democrats today fall in this lump of those who only care about social justice because their life has become so good and they have so much economic security that they think government should be the place to help others, and they don't think Republicans want to. And that's really where this media comes in. I wrote the book, The Divided Era, right above me. And you can get that on Amazon, by the way. The reality is where they get their information in blue states and cities, they get it from the school. They get it from CNN. You just had MSNBC reporter came out and said that she had to ask permission to criticize Hillary Clinton in one of her stories. They get a very skewed version of it. So when you throw all these things together, they naturally are attracted to the social justice issues and or have a lack of information. Here in California, the Latinos, there was a study when I was chairman, maybe a little bit before, which said that they had these candidates with candidate X, Y, and Z, and they put the positions down below it. And the Republican positions were the majority among Latinos. But when they put Republican and Democrat on the top row, it flipped. So what does that tell you? Well, for one thing, it tells you that Republicans don't reach Democrats almost at all. When I was chairman, Olivia will remember, I had the first ever Latino town hall on Univision, ran nationwide. Univision won an Emmy. I did not. That was very disturbing. But we began to reach people. I had a massive volunteer force. Every Latino issue, we were up on Latino radio. So I think they are natural. There's very many that are naturally inclined to social justice because they've reached economic security. Over half of American spending today is on non-essentials. As a civilization, that means we think we should be for causes, not for bread and butter on our own. And their information sources keep them cocooned. We have to break that cocoon. And the only way you can do that in today's environment is in person.
All right, great. Anything else? Because I've got some if you don't.
I have.
Yeah, don't be shy at all. You can ask me almost anything.
Is there a way to dismantle the administrative state and return to a constitutional republic?
Well, if you look at the history of mankind, there's very few examples of large governments, civilizations where governments start out large and end up small and efficient. There are none. Having said that, in Sweden used to have government spending above 70% of the whole economy. Now they're below 70%. They have charter schools. There's no minimum wage, and they're doing better. We do have this administrative state, and I have a friend, you might know him, Steve Bannon, where I've told him to stop using the phrase deep state because there ain't nothing deep about it no more. It's right on the surface. And the answer to the question is, kind of sadly, I have to say this. I mean, let's face it, seven of the 9 richest counties in America surround Washington, D.C.? What does that tell you? It's big business to them. The answer isn't to vote. In order to create some sort of disruption, it has to come from without. We Republicans have, as a history, have sent governors to Washington, D.C. to break things up. Again, we need to rally behind some sort of disruptive idea in order to do that. It would be great if the Republicans in the House, and they're off to a great start, really do expose the administrative state and some of the things that are going on. But that is not enough. Remember, I said at the start of this, it's one thing to say the other side is bad or the other dynamic is bad. Republicans then have to do 2 ultra important things. One, say, here's how we're going to fix this. And then the third step, which is critical, don't argue with the Washington Post. Go around the country, literally, and sell the solution in person. Get away from ABC's coverage, CNN's coverage, and force local coverage. Imagine if a House committee ran something on the border, literally from Arizona within view of the border. They were there, they were outside, there was TV sets, whatever. You need to create news to make the difference, not just say things. When I was chairman of the California Republican Party, I did this town hall series, and I did a town hall series on education. But what did I do? I did it with teenagers as who was doing the panel. Now, if I'd have sent out press release saying, you know, education stinks and blah, blah, blah. No one would have heard of it, right? But because I did it in a unique way, it got on the news and people listened and they thought it was interesting. So to break the administrative state, we need the Republicans to investigate, produce solutions, and put that in the hands of voters and sell it to them where they live. Otherwise, it'll never reach them, and there's no push. How did Reagan and tax cuts become popular? Because it started somewhere and caught fire. You got to start the fire outside to reach Washington, D.C.
It's true. Erica?
How do you feel about getting out the vote early and also plug your upcoming film?
I think what do
I think about early voting? I believe in Andrew Jackson's time, I'm pretty sure it was him, they actually would start voting in April. Now, how frightening would that be? April to November.
Scary.
You know, I am a fan of Election Day. I'm a fan of paper ballots. You know, this iPhone we have has been around since 2006. We think it's been around our whole lives. The technology today is nothing compared to what they're going to have in 20 years, and voter integrity will be even more difficult in 20 years. So how do we deal with this? Well, the laws in a lot of blue states are for early voting, and they chase ballots down. Now, in the olden days, 2008, Republicans, we knew in California, absentee ballots would go out. We had a list of who got them. As soon as they dropped, we called them and said, hey, your ballot's in, can you turn it in? 3 weeks later, we knew who had voted. We called the rest. A couple of weeks later, we really started calling them. And then 2 days before, we said, it's too late. You got to drop it off. Do you need us to come pick you up? Democrats have added some steps, but it's not, we're not going to win elections if we go, oh, I don't like that. Because those are the existing rules. We can play within them and we can do it ethically, but we have to do it because there's no question that they're grabbing them in bunches. I think you know what I mean. And they're stuffing ballot boxes, just like they did. I talk about it in my book, The Divided Era, during the Reconstruction era to keep blacks from getting elected in the South. They stuffed ballot boxes nonstop. So, but we got to participate in it. Would I prefer truly absentee balloting where you can't get there and election day voting only? Yes, but it's 2023. The rules exist and we need to get out there. As far as your fine comment, I'm in a movie upcoming. It's called Sweetwater. It's in theaters nationwide on April 14th. It's about the first, excuse me, I was much better in my lines in the film than this. It's about the first African-American in the NBA. It takes place in 1949 and 50. Sweetwater Clifton, who comes to the New York Knicks and overcomes all that you can imagine for his love of the game and his spirit and heart. I play the owner of one of the teams, and I draft one of the first African Americans into the league. And anyway, that's coming out April 14th. So please buy 1 million tickets and say the other reason why. Oh, sorry. There you go.
I love it. Okay, what else do you have, Erica?
This one's also on the subject of elections. How do we protect the Electoral College and keep elections mostly free of fraud?
Well, one of those is super easy, and one of those is next is super hard. So let's take the super easy. The Electoral College is in the Constitution. And the Constitution is not going to be amended in your lifetime, or maybe your next. There's no way 3/4 of the states are going to agree on anything. There's more red states than blue states, and they're not going to give up the Electoral College. Now, some states have wacky rules saying they'll go with whoever the other blue states go. But those are mostly blue states. The red states aren't going to go there. So the Electoral College is safe, in my view. Election integrity is hard work. And there's no substitute for being there to watch them count. We didn't have as many ballot box or drop box issues this time around because Republicans were out there with cameras and they knew it. It's just vigilant. I can't predict for you what it'll be like in 10 years, but it'll be harder. We don't want voting by cell phone. And we need a phalanx of experts on what's going on with the electronics of it all. And we're going to have to fight it tooth and nail. Because, let's face it, there are, in South Carolina, and after Reconstruction, there was many more votes than people lived, during Reconstruction, than lived in particular counties. Milwaukee in 2020 voted 89% of Milwaukee residents voted. Their previous high was 64. So voter fraud is real. If you don't believe me, just look up the history of the Daily Machine in Chicago. For decades upon decades, they rigged elections. And when I'm on TV and I hear there's no such thing as voter fraud, you're telling me that the Daily Machine couldn't go an hour and a half north to Milwaukee? But I do want to say this to you so that you know what to say. Democrats, if you notice them on TV, will say there's no such thing as nationwide or widespread fraud. That is correct. It is not widespread. It is very strategic in areas. And that's what we need to understand. And you just have to ask, keep in mind, every false vote negates an actual vote. And, look, there are examples of people going to jail, and we need to keep that up.
Okay, Erica, I think we have time for one more.
Did you have, I'm looking through these, I don't really see anything else. Did you have anything? Did you have your question?
Well, I have a couple actually, but one of the things that I saw an article recently that I wanted to get your comment on. Did you see a week ago, 2 weeks ago, I think it was Hanover, New Jersey, where a small town, I think maybe 11,000 people, so a very small town. But the mayor and the entire city council changed their political affiliation from Democrat to Republican. Did you see that at all?
I did hear of that, yes.
To me, that was just crazy. But in the article, it says that their rationale was that their positions on the council is to represent the will of the voters and to do what the voters wanted. And in the last few election cycles, on the issues, which is what you've been speaking to, they have been voting more conservative than Democrat, even though by a wide margin, there are more registered Democrats in New Jersey. So they said they would be representing their constituency better by switching to Republican because education, election integrity, all of these things, everybody was more voting with Republican.
Yeah. So look, I'll go one better with you, at least in my view. If you remember a year ago, almost exactly, San Francisco recalled 3 Democrat school board members. San Francisco.
Yes.
All in the 70s. And why was that? Well, I think the final step was when they voted to paint over George Washington mural. They wanted to spend $3 million to paint a wall. $3 million to paint a wall.
Home Depot.
But they had become so focused on non-education issues And
Right.
what happened here? Republican gave a lot of money and they ran a great recall effort and 3 of them went out. Why? Because they presented what was wrong and then talked about what would be a better solution to these people. And they did it person to person.
Right.
And so, again, it's possible even in there's only like, what, 11% Republicans or 7 in San Francisco, and yet they were able to do that. But you got to highlight the issue. That's why it's succeeded. And again, those council people, they felt the heat of where the voters were. They just weren't being altruistic. There's
Right.
no substitute for that. Look at Glenn Youngkin, who stood up in Virginia and said enough's enough. Or look at DeSantis, standing up and saying, fine, you want to teach history, but teach history, not advocacy. And there's no substitute to putting in people's hands. You got to agitate them and not overlook them.
Well, and that's one of the reasons that education has been such a huge issue for so many of our candidates, because it is a winning issue. It's not only winning with Republicans, but with independents and Democrats, because everyone has children or grandchildren or nieces and nephews, but everyone has children in their lives, and everyone wants them to have a good education. And sometimes we differ
there
a
was
bit
a
on what
recent,
education is, but I'm sorry, go
there's a
ahead.
recent story where no one in a school district in 4th grade was proficient. No one.
Oh,
The minority dropout rate in LA Unified for 2 decades has exceeded 50%. It's insane.
that is insane.
Someone's got to tap into it.
That's right. And that is an issue that everyone can get behind. So, I mean, if you're not picking that up as a potential candidate, or even if you're already elected and you just need to find your voice, that's where you should be, because everyone, I mean, the pulse of the nation is right there right now. I mean, I think honestly, as much like in Texas, the border is a big deal, but I don't think anything is bigger than election integrity and education right now, countrywide. I mean, that's just something
it's a great crossover. It's a great crossover issue. Minorities support charter schools more than whites, and we need to come to their rescue. Literally.
Absolutely.
I mean,
Absolutely.
keep this in mind with education. If you're a minority in LA Unified, they're not giving you any skills to go out in the world. So, while I do believe in personal responsibility, I don't think our school system should 100% fail these people and give them no advancement.
Right. I mean, supposedly we're teaching you something so that you can be personally responsible for yourself and contribute to society. But if we're not giving you any skill set